The first time it used my name, I thought it was someone on the intercom. The second time, I checked the cameras. No one was there. That's when I realized the problem wasn't the building. It was the job. I should have asked why the night shift position never stayed filled. What stays with me now is how normal that sounded at the time. People quit bad jobs all the time. Overnight work wears people down. Empty buildings make some people uneasy. Isolation gets under your skin. I knew all of that. What I didn't understand then was that the position wasn't hard because of the hours. It was hard because nobody ever stayed long enough to stop asking why the person before them left. The job was at a records processing center on the edge of a business park outside Columbus. During the day it looked exactly the way you'd expect: delivery trucks, office staff, carts of boxed files moving between departments, the break room smelling like burnt coffee and microwave lunches. The company handled document storage and digitization for legal and medical clients, so the building was bigger than it needed to be from the outside and more tightly controlled than it looked. The front third was administrative. Cubicles, conference rooms, reception. The back two-thirds was storage, scanning, secure shredding, and a long operations corridor that connected everything in a straight line. At night, almost all of it shut down. My title was Overnight Operations Coordinator, which meant I monitored the environmental systems, checked scheduled scanning jobs, logged any after-hours alerts, and made sure no one was in the building who wasn't supposed to be there. It sounded simple because it mostly was. And I took it because simple was what I wanted. I was 29, newly single, and trying to get my finances back under control after moving out of an apartment I'd shared with someone for almost 4 years. I needed work that paid slightly better than normal office support and didn't require pretending to be cheerful for 8 hours straight. Night shift gave me both. The schedule was 4 nights a week, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. A supervisor from the day team stayed until around 10:30 to hand things off. The cleaning crew usually finished by midnight. After that, the building was mine. That part appealed to me more than I admitted. I liked routine. Badge in. Walk the main hall. Check the dashboard. Make coffee. Sit at the desk in the small operations room and listen to the building settle. For the first few weeks, that's exactly what I got. Quiet. Predictable. A little lonely, maybe, but clean in the way lonely places can be when nothing in them is asking anything from you. And if I noticed that my supervisor never used the previous night coordinator's name, I didn't think much about it. He'd say things like, "The last guy used to leave this monitor on all night," or, "The girl before him preferred to keep that door closed." Always, "the last guy." Or, "the girl before him." Never a name. I noticed it, but I filed it under ordinary workplace weirdness and moved on. People do that all the time with details that would have helped them later. The operations room sat just off the main corridor on the first floor. It wasn't impressive. 2 desks, a wall-mounted monitor bank showing camera feeds from the hallways, loading dock, stairwells, and storage aisles, and 1 main computer that handled the overnight system dashboard. The room had no windows. The only view outward came from the cameras and the small strip of glass in the door that looked into the corridor. At night the fluorescent lighting in there felt harsher than it did during the day, probably because there was nothing else competing with it. The building itself was old enough to make small sounds in the right weather. Metal ducts ticking as the temperature changed. Door closers settling. The low buzz of motion lights on sections of hallway that rarely got used after dark. It never felt haunted. That's not what I mean. It felt like a building that didn't mind being empty. There's a difference. The first unusual thing I noticed had nothing to do with the cameras or the alarms. It was the whiteboard. On the left wall of the operations room, there was a small dry erase board where the night person was supposed to leave notes for the early morning team. Deliveries expected. Scanner jams. Maintenance requests. Anything minor that didn't need a formal report. Most mornings I'd erase my own note before leaving and write the next one at the start of my shift if there was anything to mention. One Thursday, I came in and found a line on the board that I knew I hadn't written. Check level 3 before 2:13. The handwriting wasn't mine. That part was obvious. Mine leaned right and pressed too hard. This was straighter, more careful. I stood there for a second, badge still clipped to my jacket, trying to remember if the day supervisor had written it during handoff and just forgotten to mention it. When he came down the hall a minute later with his coat on, I asked him. He looked at the board, frowned, and said, "That wasn't there when I left yesterday." Could one of the day people have written it this morning? He shrugged. Maybe. But his voice had that quality people get when they want an answer to be true more than they believe it. "What's level 3? I asked. "Storage mezzanine," he said. "Camera coverage is bad up there. Motion lights are on a separate timer." "Why before 2:13? He shook his head. "No idea." Then he did something that didn't seem important until later. He erased the note with the side of his hand instead of the eraser attached to the board. A small, thoughtless motion. But the kind people make when they don't want to treat something like an official part of the room. "Probably somebody messing around," he said. "See you tomorrow." Then he left. I stood there looking at the smudged ghost of the message for a little longer than necessary. Check level 3 before 2:13. At the time, it felt more strange than threatening. A leftover joke. A note meant for someone else. Something written by a cleaner board enough to be annoying. Still, around 1:55 that night, I found myself watching the clock. At 2:05, I got up and took the stairwell to the mezzanine. I told myself I was only doing it so the note would stop occupying space in my head. Level 3 wasn't a real floor, not in the normal office sense. It was a raised storage platform at the back of the building above part of the scanning area, accessed by a metal stairwell and a badge-controlled fire door. During the day, people went up there to retrieve archived cartons or verify box numbers. At night it was just a dim row of aisles with chain-link cage sections and motion lights that took an extra second too long to turn on. When I badged through, the first light came up with a soft electrical buzz. Then the next. Rows of gray shelving. Labeled cartons. Dusty concrete floor. Nothing else. I walked one aisle, then another. Nothing out of place. No open cages. No tipped boxes. No signs anyone had been there. At 2:12, standing under one of the motion lights, I felt stupid enough to laugh quietly at myself. At 2:13, the light behind me turned on. Not gradually. Not because I had stepped into its range. It came on somewhere farther down the aisle, just bright enough for me to notice. I turned. No one there. Just another lit section of empty shelving. I waited. The light stayed on for a few seconds, then shut itself off. That was the whole thing. No sound. No movement. No second event. I went back downstairs irritated with myself for giving a stupid note that much power. But I remembered the time exactly. 2:13, because that was the first moment the job stopped feeling entirely mine. The next week, I found another note. This one was written on a yellow routing slip left beside the keyboard. Don't sit with your back to the door. Same handwriting. Same careful straightness. No name. No explanation. The slip itself was one of the printed forms from the scanning department, so it could have come from anywhere in the building. But it hadn't been on the desk when I left that morning. I was certain of that. I checked with the day supervisor again. He gave me the same answer, only faster. No idea. Then he added, "You can toss it." Not, "We should ask around." Not, "That's weird." Just, "Toss it." I watched him say it. There's a particular way people talk when they've decided something only becomes real if they help define it. He was doing that. I didn't toss it. I folded it once and put it in my jacket pocket. That night, I moved the chair so I could see the corridor glass in the operations room door without fully turning around. I told myself I was proving something to myself, that I could choose to listen or not listen to a note left by an unknown coworker. The building stayed quiet. The cameras stayed normal. The dashboard showed nothing but the usual scanner queue and climate controls. At 1:48 a.m., the intercom at the back loading corridor gave a soft click like someone had opened the channel and then let go without speaking. I checked the camera. Empty corridor. Closed dock doors. Yellow floor lines. Nothing moving. At 2:03, one of the mezzanine cameras flickered. Those cameras were old, grainy, and mounted too high to be useful for detail. Normally I only glanced at them if a motion alert came through. This time there was no motion alert. Just a quick loss of image and then a return. I leaned closer to the screen. For maybe a second, less than that, really, I thought I saw one of the mezzanine aisle lights already on before the image stabilized. Then everything looked ordinary again. At 2:11, without meaning to, I checked the corridor glass in the door. Nothing. At 2:13, someone knocked softly twice on the other side of the operations room door. Not pounding. Not even urgent. 2 light taps on the small glass pane, as if someone polite wanted to be let in without startling me. I turned so fast the chair will squealed against the floor. The corridor was empty. The motion lights in that section had come on, brightening the hall outside the door in a cold white strip. No one stood there. No shadow moved past. The taps did not come again. I got up and opened the door immediately. Empty corridor in both directions. Every door along the wall shut. The stairwell at the far end closed. The operations room had no second exit. No ceiling hatch. No vent large enough for anything except airflow. I stood there long enough that the lights timed out and dimmed halfway before I stepped back inside. That was the first time I felt something stronger than unease. Not because a sound happened. Because it was so controlled. 2 taps. Enough to make me turn. Not enough to make sense. After that, I started asking questions more directly. Not dramatic ones. Just the kind you can still disguise as curiosity if you need to. I asked one of the women in dispatch whether the night coordinator before me had stayed long. She said, "Which one?" I asked the facilities guy if the mezzanine cameras had ever been unreliable. He said, "Not more than usual," then looked like he wished he hadn't added the last 3 words. I asked my supervisor outright why the position kept opening. He laughed once through his nose and said, "Some people don't do well alone." Then he changed the subject. That answer should have bothered me more than it did. But by then I was already doing the more dangerous thing. I was adapting. I checked the mezzanine around 2:05 most nights. I kept the chair angled toward the door. I started noticing that the building had a rhythm centered around times I had not chosen to care about before. 2:13, then, later, 3:07. Then 12:17 on the loading corridor intercom. Patterns form fast when you work alone. Faster when the thing happening to you doesn't fully announce itself. One Friday, I came in and found a fresh note already written on the whiteboard. Don't answer if it uses your name. I stared at it for a long time. Then I took a picture. I did not erase it. When the day supervisor came in, I asked him if he saw it. He looked at the board and said, "No." I thought he meant he hadn't seen who wrote it. But then I realized he was squinting at the board itself like there was nothing there. I asked, "You don't see that?" He looked at me, then back at the board, then at me again. "The board's blank." He said it carefully. Not joking. Not humoring me. Just carefully. I walked up to it. The sentence was still there. Thick black marker. Obvious. I touched the letters with my fingertip like they might smear. When I looked back at him, I could tell from his face that he thought I was about to tell him a joke that had already gone too far. I said, "Never mind." Then I erased it myself. My hand shook more than I wanted it to. I didn't tell him about the photo. I checked it later in the restroom to make sure I hadn't imagined that too. The picture showed the board clearly. And the writing on it. That was when the job crossed from odd into private. Up until then, I could still imagine a prank, a coworker, an ordinary explanation missing one or two details. But if I could see the notes and photograph the notes and another person could stand in front of the same board and see nothing, then whatever was happening was no longer happening in a way that belonged equally to the building. It was happening in relation to me. And once you understand that, your own mind becomes part of the problem. Because then every question splits in two. Did something happen? Or did it happen because you were there to notice it? The sentence on the board stayed with me all weekend. Don't answer if it uses your name. I told myself that if anything happened again, would ignore it completely. No checking. No reacting. No participating in a system I did not understand. That lasted until the following Tuesday. At 12:17, the loading corridor intercom clicked live again. I looked at the camera instead of the hallway. Empty dock doors. Still floor. Closed emergency exit. Then, through the tiny tinny speaker in the corner of the operations room, a voice said my first name. Not loud. Not distorted. Close enough to sound like it came from the handset itself instead of the wall speaker. I did not answer. The channel stayed open. I could hear soft static and something behind it that took me a second to place. Paper turning. Like a file folder being opened near the microphone. Then the voice said my name again. I still didn't answer. A few seconds later the channel closed. That should have felt like control. Instead it felt like waiting out the first knock from someone on the other side of a door you know they can open without permission. Nothing else happened for almost an hour. At 1:06, I noticed the scanner queue on the dashboard had opened a completed job from 2 weeks earlier. I hadn't clicked it. The file was for archived intake records from a legal firm in Dayton. Nothing unusual except that the page had scrolled halfway down on its own. I stared at the screen. Then the cursor moved. It didn't jerk. It didn't lag. It moved exactly the way a person moves a mouse when they're reading something carefully and don't want to lose their place. It hovered over a line item, then another. Clicked the note attachment. Opened it. The note itself was ordinary. Date. Box number. Intake discrepancy. Nothing meaningful. But the cursor stayed there long enough that I understood the problem before it finished. Someone was using my terminal. Not remotely in the normal IT sense. Not with a visible connection alert or support window. Using it in front of me. I took my hand off the mouse. The cursor continued. Clicked back out. Opened the system dashboard. Opened climate controls. Then the mezzanine camera feed. I stopped breathing for a second. The feed expanded to full screen. Grainy aisle image. Empty shelving. One motion light off, one on at the far end. The cursor moved to playback and rolled back 30 seconds. I watched the aisle rewind in rough, silent frames. Then stop. The cursor hovered in the center of the image. Nothing there. Still shelving. Still concrete. The far light on. And then the cursor drew a small yellow selection box over empty floor space about halfway down the aisle. I stared at the box. The system wasn't designed for annotations. There was no reason for a yellow rectangle to appear there except as part of a maintenance review tool nobody on night shift used. The box stayed in place. Then the feed closed. The dashboard returned. No message. No explanation. Just the cursor settling exactly where my hand had been before it moved on its own. That was the first moment I thought, very clearly, I'm not supposed to understand this before it's finished with me. I hated the thought the moment I had it. It sounded theatrical. But alone at 2 in the morning, in a room full of soft electrical hum and empty camera feeds, you don't get to choose the exact language fear arrives in. I called my manager after that. Not because I thought he could solve it, but because I needed the world outside the building to exist again for a minute. He answered on the 4th ring, already annoyed. I told him, as evenly as I could, that something was happening on the system and I needed him to come in or send someone. He asked, something like what? And I heard myself say, I think someone is using the station while I'm sitting here. Silence. Then, is anybody else in the building? I don't know. That was the first honest answer. Not because I had seen anyone. Because by then the question itself no longer meant what it would have meant before. He said he couldn't get there for at least 40 minutes. He told me to lock the operations room, keep the cameras up, and call the police if there was any actual sign of forced entry or a person on site. Actual sign. That phrase angered me more than it should have. As if the line between actual and not actual was holding perfectly steady in that room. Still, I did what he said. I locked the operations room. I brought up all corridor cameras. I sat with my phone in my hand and watched the building stare back through low-resolution feeds and fluorescent stillness. At 2:11, the intercom clicked live again. I did not answer. The speaker gave a soft hiss. Then the voice said my name once. Not calling out. Checking. When I didn't respond, it said, very quietly, good. The line went dead. At 2:13, the mezzanine camera lost image for 1 second. When it returned, the far aisle light was off. The near one was on. No motion alert. No figure. Just the change. Then someone tapped once on the glass pane in the operations room door. Not 2 taps this time. 1. I did not turn immediately. I kept my eyes on the camera wall because the board note had become the closest thing I had to a rule. Don't answer if it uses your name. It hadn't said my name this time. But the feeling behind the note had expanded in my head into something broader. Don't respond the way it wants. I looked at the corridor camera that covered the hall outside my door. Empty. Then I turned. The small pane in the door reflected the room too strongly to see much beyond it. My own monitor glow. The angle of my shoulder. The faint outline of the chair. No one standing there. No hand withdrawing. Nothing. And yet the tap had been real enough that my skin still felt aware of it. I sat very still for maybe 30 seconds. Then the cursor moved again. It opened the internal messaging system. A blank compose window appeared. For a moment nothing happened. Then text began to appear, one careful letter at a time. You don't have to keep checking. All caps. No punctuation. I stared at it. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence, waiting like it expected the room to answer on my behalf. Then another line appeared beneath it. They never stay. I felt cold immediately. Not frightened in the movie sense. Just internally cold, like something in my body had been told a fact it didn't want and had made room for it before I agreed. The cursor blinked again. A third line appeared. Not for long. Then the window closed. No save. No sent message. Nothing. I looked at the empty corridor feed outside the door and understood, all at once, what had been wrong with every conversation I'd had about the position. No one talked about the people before me because the people before me had not become ordinary former employees. They had become part of whatever everyone else was trying not to make visible by naming directly. The last guy. The girl before him. Some people don't do well alone. They never stay. That was the moment the job became impossible. Not because I thought something was going to hurt me. Because I finally understood that there was no point at which enough careful logging or practical thinking would flatten this back into a system problem. The position itself had a shape to it. And I had stepped into it. My manager got there at 2:52. We walked the building together, just like I had imagined someone eventually would. Main corridor. Break room. Dispatch office. Storage cage. Stairwell. Mezzanine. Everything empty. Nothing visibly wrong. He tried the operation room keyboard and mouse and said nothing was strange now. He checked for remote sessions. None. Camera logs. Nothing useful. Door access. Only mine. He was kind, in the way people are kind when they want you to feel heard without fully agreeing to what hearing would require of them. He offered to sit with me until dawn. I told him I was leaving instead. He didn't argue. I grabbed my coat, my phone, the folded routing slip, and the photo of the whiteboard note still open on my screen. As we reached the side exit, the loading corridor intercom clicked live one last time. My manager stopped walking. The speaker hissed. Then the voice said, very clearly, my first name. Not his. Mine. He looked at me. I looked at him. For the first time in weeks, I knew with certainty that I had not invented any of it. That should have felt good. Instead it felt like the removal of my last useful defense. We left together. He locked the building behind us. I never went back. Officially, I resigned 3 days later. Unofficially, I had already left the second that voice spoke in front of someone else. The company posted the position again within a week. I know that because I checked. I don't even know why I checked, exactly. Morbid curiosity, probably. Or the need to see whether they would change the wording. They didn't. Same title. Same hours. Same line about independent work and self-direction. A month later, I looked again. Still open. Then filled. Then open again after 6 weeks. I stopped checking after that, because patterns only become more convincing when you volunteer to keep seeing them. I wish I could say that was the end of it. It mostly was. No more intercom pages. No more cursor movement. No more notes visible only to me. But the strange part about having a thing happen to you in a place built from schedules and systems is that you don't stop believing in systems afterward. You just stop trusting that they describe all the participants. Now, if I'm in a quiet office after dark and I hear an intercom click or see a monitor wake itself from sleep, I don't think ghost, or intruder, or anything dramatic. I think of positions. Open ones. Night ones. The jobs nobody keeps. And I wonder how many workplaces have one shift that always seems harder to fill than it should be. How many supervisors have learned not to use names when they talk about the person who had it last? How many buildings know exactly when they're empty enough to start addressing someone directly? Because once you've worked one of those jobs, you stop asking why the position keeps opening. You start asking why it ever closes at all.